Hi, everyone. Today we're doing part 4 of what is going to be a 4-part series on training your reactive dog to walk with like another dog in your household. Um, Many of you have asked us, well, once I've done some training with my reactive dog, how do I get them to walk with our other dog without both of them pulling and barking? And we've covered a lot of little pieces of this training in the past several weeks. We've talked about your own leash handling skills, your dog's ability to wait for treats if you're training two dogs at the same time with treats. Um, and today we're going to be talking finally about working with the two dogs around triggers for the reactive dog. All right, let's jump into the slides. Oh, I'm going to have to go back. Sorry about this. Here we are. All right, and as I'm going through this, you can submit questions if you would like in the comments under wherever you're watching this, and it'll pop up for me. All right, training two dogs to walk together, training around triggers. This is the hardest part, or one of the harder parts, of course, of working with even one reactive dog at a time, never mind adding a second dog into the mix. Now, you'll remember if you've been following this series that we started talking about dog skills and human skills and how we need to build both new skills for dogs and for us, for the people holding the leashes. For humans, we have to learn how to manage two leashes without ending up tangled up or dropping leashes. We need to know how to reinforce two dogs if we're walking two dogs on our own. And to be quick about it, because sometimes with reactive dogs, you don't have a lot of leeway. So we talked about these points in earlier weeks, and if you missed those, you can find them on the blog. That's dogkindtraining.com/blog. And we've also talked about how the dogs need skills on their own. They need to be able to do a number of behaviors on their own walks before you try to integrate them. So this training I'm doing today is assuming that you are in a pretty good place with your reactive dog, like their walks on their own are pretty uneventful before you try to add the second dog. So each dog individually needs to know how to walk politely on a loose leash, assuming that's something you want the two dogs to do together. They need to be able to do it one at a time also. And they have to have some skills that you can call on, like a look at me or a hand touch or a find it, that you can use when you want them to look away from a trigger, move away from a trigger. Which is especially important because we're assuming that one of these dogs is reactive that you're walking. Okay. By the way, if anyone can, if you can hear me, please give me a thumbs up or a comment just so I can make sure. I'm pretty sure I have audio, but it's happened enough times now that I get nervous when I don't have any questions. All right. Here we go. So once your dogs have skills individually, they can walk nicely on leash. They've got some behaviors that you can ask for in cue, and they'll do them pretty reliably. Then you train them to do those things together. And that's some of what we covered in the first couple sessions of the series. They need to be able to walk together on leash, wait for treats. And what we're talking about today is that they need to have, when together, be able to respond reliably to cues. And today we're talking about responding reliably to cues, even around triggers. And by triggers, I mean whatever it is your reactive dog barks at or lunges at, like other dogs, cars, bikes, whatever. All right, so some key points to keep in mind when you're training the two dogs together. One is that distance is your friend and you want to use as much of it as you can. I know that some of you live in areas where it's kind of tough to get as much distance as you would like, and you might want to consider then setting up training sessions for the two dogs early on where you're driving somewhere like, I don't know, some kind of open space, a field where you can work before you try to walk them on neighborhood sidewalks. I recommend involving two people in this training as long as you feel the need for it. I'm going to show you some video of people training two dogs together, and there's a handler for each dog. So each person just has the one leash. And that's a good thing to do until both dogs are pretty reliable. Like they see a trigger and you can cue some behavior that you like, and they'll do it most of the time. And then even once you get to that point, you may have noticed as we go through all of these videos that it's not just dog training, right? These are also training plans for ourselves, for the human end of the leash. So think about what you're comfortable with. Even if your dog is responding reliably to some of your cues, keep your backup with you until you feel ready to try it on your own, to try walking your two dogs on your own. Okay, so how to start easy. Keep good distance to triggers as much as you can. And the easiest way to do this might be to recruit a helper in early training sessions that you can kind of control. I mean, you can ask them, please stay at this distance, and working in a more open space, just so that you can start to build these behaviors with the two dogs together. The distance between the two dogs you can manipulate if you have two handlers, which we've talked about, which is the next point here. For some dogs, being close to each other is okay, is not much harder, but for some other dogs, being right next to another dog will means that they're less likely to respond to the cues you give them. So experiment a bit and decide and figure out what's easiest for the two dogs you are working with. And finally, I kind of like when you're starting out to just go somewhere and park. And not, I don't mean park in a car, but just stand there with the dogs. Adding your own movement, like walking, adds another layer of difficulty to the training. So again, I'll show you some examples of that where you just pick a place to train, and then you're just going to stay there. So you can add walking later. All right, we're going to just look at some video. Okay, so this is an example of a setup, a training setup in a relatively quiet area with a helper. I guess with a couple helpers here. So our trainer, Melissa, is holding the leash of her dog, Pepper. Her good-natured husband has Zuma. They're in a quiet cul-de-sac where there's not a lot of traffic at this time of the day. And they are using one of their kiddos to help them, to be a trigger that they can tell where to go and how far away to stay. So here you see two people each holding a leash. When the dogs orient toward or look at the trigger, the kid on the bike, then they are cued to look at, well, I think they're doing a combination of look at me and find it. And you see in those first, I'm going to rewind this here, their son was pretty far away, and then they said, okay, now we're ready. Let's move that trigger. Let's move you a little bit closer. And so that's something that's so much easier to do if you have someone to help you. You don't have to, though. I mean, you can do this with opportunistic triggers as well. It's just a little bit tougher. You just have to wait until you find the right situation. Okay, so once your dogs can respond to the cues and do the behaviors you want them to do, when there are two of you, two people, one with each leash, in sort of, and stationary, like I just showed, you can make it a little bit harder. And there are lots of ways to make it more difficult. And I would only change one of these at a time. We often get impatient and want to just say, okay, that was good, I'm just going to go on a walk now with the dogs. But often on a sort of regular neighborhood walk, several things can happen at once. That means there's a huge jump in difficulty for your dogs, and then you'll have a bad experience. They'll have a bad experience, and you might be less likely to want to try it again. So just to make it a little more pleasant for you and the dogs, I would choose one of these at a time to change. Make sure the dogs are doing okay and that you're feeling okay before making another thing harder, if that makes sense. So obviously being closer to triggers will make it more difficult. For many dogs, but not all, having the dogs closer together can make it tougher. Going down to one handler definitely makes it tougher for you, one person holding both leashes, and then adding movement. So you're not just standing there doing training, now you're walking. Okay, so here, Rachel and our good friend Christy are demoing, working with, these are actually both both reactive dogs, working around triggers and doing some movement, and also that concept of having your backup with you, even if you're holding both the leashes. So they're hanging out on a sidewalk. There are a couple triggers here, strangers and dogs, and they're individually working with their dogs, but the dogs are right next to each other and the triggers are pretty close. They're going to add some, here Rachel's taking both leashes, so that's a pretty big jump in difficulty for us humans, and so you should have practiced this if possible, say in the backyard before trying it out in the world. Adding some walking, so some movement, and you see how Christy is right there to help, so that if something goes wrong, Rachel has some support. And I know how stressful it can be to walk even just one reactive dog. A lot of you have mentioned, how unpleasant your walks are. They're stressful. You're constantly scanning, just like your dog, probably. The idea of having a relaxing walk seems pretty impossible. So give yourself this gift of having this backup with you. You have a friend, a family member who's willing to help. Even though you would be doing this training likely because ultimately you'd like the option of walking the two dogs by yourself, don't rush into it. So here, just as an example, this wasn't an emergency or anything, but Rachel's just demoing to make the point. If you're in trouble, you can hand off one of the leashes to your backup person. And just knowing that option is there sometimes is enough to make the walk a lot more pleasant for you. All right, so this was a little bit of a brief overview. There's really no way to get deep enough into this topic in a single live video to address all possible concerns and all possible situations, but I'm hoping that it gives you a little bit of a framework to start with. If you've made it this far in the series and you're ready to start trying to walk the two dogs together. All right, any questions? If you have a question, please put it under the video on Facebook, YouTube, wherever you're watching. And I'll keep an eye out for it. If you're not in our Facebook group already, very nice group of people, lots of support there. My team is in that group every day. And we try to answer as many questions as we can. So that's the link there. Okay. All right, everyone. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, like I said, if you're watching this as the recording, if you put questions under the video, we'll get alerted so we can answer them. Next week, we'll be probably back doing something with fearful dogs. And I hope to see you then. Have a wonderful week.